All right, so this is like my least favorite part of the off season. It's kind of like that late summer point where there aren't many NBA storylines going on. All the big free agency moves have already happened, and I don't really anticipate there being any more big time trades at this point. So I'm kind of left to get pretty creative with content ideas. But I did read a Bleacher Report article earlier this week that was pretty interesting, where they list off a set of players who they believe are the most overrated players in the NBA. So I'm going to react to that article and see if they're exaggerating on some of those players they listed off, or if they were right about some of the guys they listed off here in the article. And let's get right into it. And the first guy they name off here is Jonathan Kuminga. So I can understand why he's on this list. Warriors fans do believe that Jonathan Kuminga at some point in time will be like a franchise cornerstone guy for this team, right? And I want to give him credit. He's improved year in and year out. So, for example, last season, he averaged 16.1 points per game, which was a major jump from the 9.9 points he averaged the season before that. And he did well with more minutes. So it's proven now that with more minutes, he can produce at a very high level. So he's a very reliable player for Steve Kerr at this point in his career. And he does have a lot of really good tangible skill sets and also intangible skill sets. But is he franchise cornerstone? I don't know, right? I feel like Warriors fans, as I said, are trying to put that label on him because this is kind of near the end of like that Steph Curry era. Things are definitely different right now in Golden State with Klay Thompson no longer being there. There is no more big three in Golden State. So they are looking for that next up guy. And I generally think the Warriors front office has done a good job at getting young players to make sure they're somewhat set for the future. But I don't know if Kuminga is franchise cornerstone just yet, right? Maybe his upside, maybe his ceiling is kind of like what Drew Holiday is at this point in his career for the Celtics. He's not a primary creator, not a top option on offense, but he just fits well within the team's offense and is very reliable. Is that Kuminga's role? Is that where he'd be the most optimized at? I think so, right? And there is a world where Kuminga could be like a 25 point per game scorer and is treated like a number one priority or number two priority on offense. But just because he can put up numbers well within that role, that doesn't always mean he's the most optimized for that role, right? There are a lot of guys right now in the NBA that are putting up great numbers, but they're not optimized within specific roles that the coaches are asking them to play, right? So for example, Tobias Harris, he can go get 20 points per game, but Philly for a couple of years was trying to use him as like a primary creator on the perimeter. He wasn't good enough to do that on a consistent basis on a contender. Kind of like Jonathan Kuminga, right? I think that's where he's kind of at. So I can understand a bit why he'd be here on this list. Again, great player. He's improved year in and year out. But like franchise cornerstone, I'm not sure. So that's kind of why he's here on this list. Again, he's shown some great stuff throughout his first couple of years. He does have an NBA championship, which is huge for a young player being able to play at that level so early in his career. But I don't think he's franchise cornerstone just yet. I don't think he'll have that type of upside, and Warriors fans do. So I think he deserves a spot on this list just a little bit, right? I can see why people are excited about him, but I don't think he's going to be as good as a lot of Dubs fans expect him to be. Next guy on the list is Jalen Green. So this one is one I'd have to disagree with. I think Jalen Green last season showed us enough to make us believe that he can end up being like that all-star, potential superstar level player sometime down the road in his career. His skill set kind of screams that, right? He screams that he could be a future all-star, superstar caliber player. Amazing shot creator off the dribble with scary, and I mean scary athleticism. He is one of the most athletic players in the NBA. He almost has like some young Kobe-like athleticism in his game where he's able to finish athletically over guys in traffic quite like he does. There was a point where earlier in his career, like right after he got drafted, those first couple of seasons, where I was a bit worried. But one thing that's kind of common with younger scoring-minded players is there is going to be a bit of a learning curve, right? Sometimes they're going to come in, they're going to show great things in spurts, they're going to be inefficient, and there are going to be other times where they're going to be efficient, they're going to have these great moments. That's natural for a young scoring-minded player. And we saw last season, he performed very well in spurts. So post All-Star break, for example, he put up 22.6 points and drained 37% of his threes and was 56% shooting from a true shooting standpoint. And during the month of March, he had an amazing run, putting up 27.7 points while making nearly 41% of his threes as he was helping the Rockets actually fight for something. They were fighting for a play-in tournament appearance. So for him, his biggest thing is going to be consistency. The question is, we saw you do that in Spurs last season. Can you bring that into this coming season, right? So given that, right, that's going to be the biggest concern for him. I do have faith that he'll be able to do that because, for one, he has really good mentorship playing under Ime Udoka, who is really one of the best connectors to younger players in the league right now. And as I said, he's just given us enough through his game to make us believe that he can end up getting to that level he was projected to get at in the NBA draft when he was drafted and things like that. So I'm excited about Jalen Green. I don't think he's overrated at all. Again, his career hasn't been off to like an amazing start just yet, where we're seeing a couple of guys come in and make the All-Star game in their second season. He's not there, but still a lot of upside and a lot of belief and hope that he'll end up becoming that player the Rockets projected him to be early on in his career. So I don't think he's overrated. He's had a pretty disappointing start. I think most people know that, but it looks like he's getting it right at this point in his career. I'm excited to see if he's able to bring that play he had last season into this season. Another name they list off is Miles Bridges. I 100% agree with this. I don't think that highly of Miles Bridges as a player. And only thing about him being here is I don't think too many people think that highly of him as a player at this point in his career. I don't see too many people walking around thinking Miles Bridges is like an all-star caliber guy or can be an all-star caliber guy down the road. I think people are pretty mild on how they look at him as a player. So he has put up pretty solid numbers over the course of his career. Last 2 whole seasons he's played, he's put up at least 20 points and 7 boards. But the thing is this, he is playing on a really bad team. The Hornets have been pretty bad for a while. The best they've done over the last couple of seasons was make the play-in tournament. And even in that play-in tournament game, they were pitiful. It was really rough to watch. So his numbers have been nice, but like I said, it's kind of one of those things where he's putting up solid numbers on a really bad team in a really bad situation, and a team that just doesn't have a winning culture at all, right? And so given that his name has had a ton of buzz on the trade market, there was a point in time where there are a lot of suitors looking to make moves for him. But the question is this, right? Let's say he would have gotten picked up by a contender this summer. What does he bring to the table? We know he won't be a primary creator on a contending team. So if asked to be a role player, what does he specialize in? He's not an amazing defender. He has the body for it, but he's not consistent enough from a defensive standpoint to be a really good point of attack guy or even a really good defensive playmaker. Not a consistent enough shooter, especially off the catch. If you're going to be a wing guy, if you're going to be a perimeter guy, and you're a role player on a championship level team, you have got to be able to knock down shots. And that's not something he can do at a very high level at all. He's never been able to do it, and he's not going to be able to do it, or hasn't shown he's been able to do it. Maybe he can get better at that, but from what we've seen, that's really not his game. So I just don't know how good he can be on an actual contender, right? I don't know how much of a contributor he can be on an actual championship level squad. We've seen that happen before, where a guy goes from a bad team and he ends up playing a big role on a contender and his production kind of dwindles. We've seen that happen a ton. And I think he's kind of in that category, right? So I never thought too highly of Miles Bridges as a player. Again, very athletic, fun to watch, very skilled, and the numbers are still good. Putting up 20 points per game in the NBA is a very difficult thing to do. But what is his role if he's on a really good team, right? Too many guys aren't really going to be like highly touted players. Like, they're not going to get looked at that highly because they're putting up great numbers on bad teams. The question is always going to be, okay, when you're finally on a contender, when you're finally playing for something, what are your contributions? And I don't know what his contributions would be in a winning situation. So I understand why Bridges is on this list 100%. This last one here is one I definitely disagree with, and it is Jamal Murray. So with Murray, my thing is this. I've always said he's underrated. He's really good in the playoffs. He is one of the best postseason performers we've seen over the last couple of years. He's had some classic playoff performances, countless clutch performances and clutch moments, especially those clutch moments he had against the Lakers in that first round. He's done all of that while never making an all-star or all-NBA team, right? And he's had these amazing playoff moments. He's outplayed a lot of other all-star guards in the playoffs. There are some all-star guards in the league right now who are kind of known to hit this wall in the playoffs. With Murray, he's gotten better in the playoffs. He's one of those guys who put up like 19, 20 in the regular season, then elevate that to 26 points per game in the postseason, right? So I don't really understand why anybody would think he's overrated. I think the premise of him being on this list is based on this fact that he isn't as good, or the Nuggets aren't as good with him as their primary creator and with Jokic off the floor. So for some numbers to kind of quantify that a bit, last year his effective field goal percentage dipped from 57% with Jokic on the floor to 49% without him, and the Nuggets offensive rating dipped with him leading the offense and with Jokic being out. But the issue with that is this: that happens with any team. Like, when any team is without their best player, there's going to be a dip when it comes to their offense. They're not going to be as good. I don't care who your second option is. If your best player is someone who's like an MVP, someone who is arguably the best player in the world, if they're off the court, your offense isn't going to be as good. I don't think that's an indictment on your second option. That's just how it is. So, for example, like if LeBron in 2013 missed a huge stretch of games, which didn't happen. Like, let's say it did happen. The Heat would see a little bit of a fall off from an offensive standpoint, even with Wade being an all-star player, right? There's still going to be somewhat of a level of fall off offensively. They may still be good, but they're not going to be as good relative to LeBron being there. That happens all the time. Does that make you any less of a player when your best guy is out and your team dips a little bit? No, because that's your best guy, right? Like, I don't think too many people are saying John Stockton is overrated because he played with Karl Malone. They were just known as a great duo. And I think that's the case here in Denver, right? They're just a really good duo. Two guys who really play super well off of each other, right? And to me, that's not fair enough to say that Murray's overrated because that offense, or he's probably not as efficient without Jokic, a guy who was like the best passer in the league and arguably one of the 5 greatest passers of all time. That's not fair to say if he's not as productive with a guy like that being off the court. So I don't really agree with this one. I see where they're getting at, but I just think that argument falls short, because you can literally say that with any team, that if they don't have their best guy, there's going to be a bit of a fall off from an offensive and sometimes defensive standpoint. So I do understand the questions about whether or not Murray is an all-star, like on a different team in a different situation, but to say that he's overrated because there's a little bit of a fall off when Jokic is off the court, you can say that about any team in NBA history. There's going to be some fall off. There are some anomalies to that rule, but that's generally how things will be if your best guy, your MVP guy, is off the court. So I do disagree with this one. I get the premise, I get the idea, but I'm not 100% behind it. I've actually been in the camp and in the school of thought where Jamal Murray is one of the most underrated players in the NBA today. So those are my thoughts on this list. Let me know in the comments, and also list off some other guys who you think are actually overrated and things like that. But thanks for watching. Let me know how you feel in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe.